if what you love is taken away or ends, you feel grief. Right? That's normal.
Right.
Right? Yeah. Because if you didn't feel grief, then I would say you never loved.
Hello and welcome to Self Talk. I'm your host, Rachel Astarte. My guest today is Esther Kalaba. She's an art therapist, somatic psychotherapist, known by many as the breathwork lady. Her signature therapeutic offerings combine movement, art, breathing, and meditation, and teach us basic skills in how to be human. She's the founder of the People of the Prana, an organization that specializes in teaching breathing practices to support emotional and mental well-being for everyone. Esther, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Rachel.
We're going to talk today for the listeners, so just jump right in and not bury the lead. Today, we're going to talk about grief. And that's a subject that comes up a lot, certainly in my work with clients, and I would assume for you as well. But before we get into grief and breath, right, we're going to talk about the two of those. How did you get into this field?
The grief.
All of it. Yeah. Into your work, doing somatic work and art therapy and, this combination of human well-being.
Yeah. I mean, that's a longer story, but I think I got into, this work, when my brother, when I was 22, my brother died. And my brother was actually murdered. I mean, he didn't just die. So, growing up in kind of middle class suburban setting, this was not something that I was kind of prepared for or expecting or just in my frame of consciousness. And so that event really, really shook me on just so many levels, and spiritually and so, and it kind of led me down this route of, okay, well, what do I do now? What do you do when everything that you have known to be true, your entire foundation for the way that you thought life was and supposed to be? I mean, I was 22 at the time, so I was also, kind of entering the world and kind of, with this curiosity and excitement of somebody just kind of beginning to kind of get to know the world and get to know myself in the world, and my brother dies. And so, and at that time, I mean, this was a while ago, there wasn't really there weren't people around me who I could share this experience with. In fact, often people would just kind of shut down. And especially, when I would say, well, my brother was stabbed, and that would be an instant conversation stopper. So I kind of journeyed with this alone for a lot of the time. And this is pre-internet. This is the kind of typing something on Google and having some responses. So, and through that, I instinctively kind of knew that what would help me is to make art. And so I actually, I was thinking of going to medical school, and then I got accepted to art school, and then I went to art school. And really, at the base of it was, I just need to work with my hands. I need to, create something from this feeling of loss. And so that's how I, really firsthand learned art therapy, because I'm an art therapist, but got to go through that process of what happens when we start creating in these times of deep, deep grief. And what that became, because I worked with textiles, what that actually became was a project where for my brother, I created a piece where I had, a collection of old clothing, very old clothing from people I didn't know, old linens. And I cut it up in very small pieces. And then I sewed with this technique of machine embroidery a new garment, new fabric. It wasn't like a patchwork. It was much more intricate. So the threads were all exposed. And it really was this process of kind of piecing together memories with the holes in between, and the way that memory kind of weathers through time, but there are these common threads. And that became a community arts project that I headed about 15 years ago, called Collecting Loss, where I collected clothing from people who had died, from their loved ones, and then I wove them all together in this kind of collective fabric, so that people had a place to come together and gather and have their grief recognized.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
So
in a way that you didn't have when you were going through that grief. Yeah. Beautiful.
In a way that I think a lot of people, even today, don't have. And I'm a psychotherapist. So, in my practice, I would say learning grief is one of the things that most people come to me for, whether they know it or not, right? You go to therapy when there is some sort of ending, or, something has fallen apart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Yeah.
So beautiful. And then how did the art part of your work, where did the breath come in? Where did somatic work come in? I mean, we can make a logical leap, but how did that come to you in your work? I mean, people would listen to the story and say, doing art therapy and being an artist, that's enough. Like, that's a lot of good healing right there. So how did breath work come in?
Yeah, well, I mean, breath is the foundation. So, I was working with people, I was working clinically in many different types of settings. And so as a therapist, one of the beautiful parts of this profession is to be able to really be invited into somebody's world, and in this very intimate way that, a lot of people don't even get entry there,
Right, yeah.
And so, I always feel like I'm invited into somebody's home, and I get to kind of look around. And when you're doing art with people, it's almost like you get to know people in another way too, right? Through the images, through the color, but also through their movements, through how do I approach a piece of paper? How do I approach a ball of clay, right? And it's a very physical, embodied experience to make art, right? It's not intellectual, and if it is intellectual, you're not doing,
Right.
Yeah. So then that just became a way to transition into movement. And so like in my studio, I would work very big with people. So we would have big pieces of paper on the wall. So it was a physical experience, encountering the page and moving with the page. And then the breath kind of just came with that, right? Because when you move, you breathe, right?
Yeah.
So, and this is what, I think as therapists, we develop these skills of really being able to listen, and to listen to what is not being expressed as well as what is being expressed. And in between that, there is the space, and that's the breath. Mm-hmm. Right. So you can actually get to know everything about somebody just from listening to their breath.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so this, and then, I also trained with amazing teachers in the Kundalini yoga tradition, and then in a healing tradition that is based with the breath. And so, I came at it in a very, how can I say, hands-on experiential way. So I've been, doing this for 20 years and really developing the capacity to listen, right? Which is what the breath teaches you, because I think, everything we need to know about life and how to live can be taught by our breath if we just choose to listen,
Yeah. And there is so much there. But I love what you said about, I mean, again, interesting. It's a natural connection that I hadn't made until you said it. Yet when you're moving and you're breathing, and then being able to pay attention to that, and what happens, that, sometimes when we are talking about something or expressing something that's difficult, we hold our breath.
Mm-hmm.
And so to notice that and say, okay, so how is that affecting this person, and how do we shift that? It's beautiful. So let's walk it back. Thank you for that explanation, because that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Let's walk it back to grief for a second. So just the process of grieving.
Mm-hmm.
So, and when we encounter clients who are grieving,
Mm-hmm.
it's oftentimes unmanageable for them, which may in fact be why they're coming to you as a therapist.
Mm-hmm.
And it's unbearable to go through that kind of pain. And we've all been through it in one way or another, right? Or many of us have. Yeah. So one of the questions that I get from clients, and I wonder if you get this too, is, why do I have to go through this? Why do I have to grieve? Why can't I just stay busy with work? Why can't I just get away from the icky feelings? And I know what my answer is, but I would love to get your reaction and response to, why is the process of grieving important?
Well, what I like to ask people, because I feel like grief is really misunderstood for the most part, right? And there is this kind of equation, I think maybe we've grown up with, maybe it's a cultural thing, I don't know where it comes from, that, grief is bad or pain is bad, or I need to avoid this. But if we ask ourselves, well, what is grief actually? What does grief show us? What does grief teach us? Right. And what does it mean to be grief free? Right. So what does that mean, really? Well, when you grieve something, it's usually because you love it. Right.
Right.
And so if what you love is taken away or ends, you feel grief. Right? That's normal.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Because if you didn't feel grief, then I would say you never loved. Right.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And so let's kind of rewind, right? And if I don't feel my grief, if I don't need to feel grief, then you wonder, well, what is it that you've ever loved?
Yeah.
Right. So grief is the sister to love.
Right.
And they come together because, if you've ever been in a relationship with anybody, the one thing that is guaranteed 100% is that one of you will leave.
That's right.
At one point. That's what you sign up for every time.
And it from day one. Yeah.
You know it from day one. You don't know when it'll be. You don't know how it'll be. But you know that one of you will leave at one point. But you do it anyway.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah. So I think, grief is a part of life if you want to be in love with anything in the world.
Hi, it's Rachel here. If you'd like to dive deeper into your own self-development, but you're looking for an alternative to traditional talk therapy, I think you'll love the Foundation of Self Immersion program. For a full year, you'll get dynamic coursework you can complete on your own time, plus weekly coaching calls and monthly one-on-one sessions with me for personal support. Visit foundationofself.com and click on the events page for more information. That's foundationofself.com. Now, back to the episode. Yeah, totally. I read somewhere, probably one of those things on the internet, but it was a nice way to look at it, speaking of what you're saying, that grief is love with nowhere to go. And And so it's like, what do I do with this feeling? And that, I think, is the unbearable part. It's like banging against this cage of your heart, and then all of going into the psychotherapy part of it, going into the mind and causing all sorts of problems, with why did this happen, and could I have stopped it, or what if I had done, what was my relationship like with this person? Could I have said something differently or better or whatever? So there's all this stuff that's happening. There's the emotional, there's the mental, there's the spiritual as well. So that leads me to the next question, which is, how do art and breath work help with grieving? And you might take these separately, or you might take them together, because I know they're both effective. Maybe that would be interesting. Do art, then breath, then the combo.
Yeah, I mean that's what I do with people. But I think that the first thing to just mention is that grief, my experience with it is that it's not something that needs to be solved,
right,
or fixed, right? And so this is often in the therapy model, we're working with trying to improve things or trying to make it better. And sometimes, I mean, you can't. That's it. It's just very, very heartbreaking. And maybe the heart does need to break. And we can't fix that, right? So that's the first thing, is that there's no solution to grief, right? But rather, if we can see grief as a skill. And I say this to young people I work with, right? Because they often have those grievances, right? Why do I have to go through this?
Yeah. This sucks. Yeah.
Yeah, this really sucks. And what I like to say to them is, well, you're 20 now, right? And you're kind of like a baby apprentice in grief. Right. But should you be so lucky that in 20 years, 30 years, you could get so good at this skill of grieving that you could help those who come after you. Right.
Beautiful. Yeah.
So it's a skill, right? So it's something that we practice. And I think everybody practices in a different way.
Yeah.
Right. And so coming to the breath, like I said, everything you need to know about life is found in each inhale and each exhale. And so let's talk about the exhale. Because a lot of us focus on inhaling, taking in life, right? And then there has to be an exhale. There has to be like this is, there's no choice, right?
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah. And so how many of us spend time thinking about our final exhale? Right. And how many of us have witnessed other people's last exhale? Like, I mean, when you exhale, you literally expire.
Yeah.
Right. So if you just think in each breath, we have this beautiful way of practicing receiving life, inhale, and then exhale, letting go, right? And letting go is also giving, right? So what do we give back? So could grief and the way in which we give to the world be the same thing? Right? Because when you exhale, like even the word we exhale, we sing, with our voice.
Yeah.
So what is it that we give back into the world, right? Through our breath, through our death, what do we give to the world? What does our life give to the world? Then we're talking about, well, what is your legacy, right? What do you leave behind?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the legacy, and this is something I work with women in midlife too. It's like, well, why am I here? What am I at middle age? It's when we really start to ask that question, mainly because we are coming to terms with our mortality in a way that we might not have done earlier, when we were learning how to be the person that we wanted to be. So now we've done all these things, and now we're like, oh, well, why do I not feel fulfilled?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it speaks to what you're saying, is there's a larger purpose at work besides our own personal development.
Mm-hmm.
And so our life, being able to have the skill of grieving, being able to have the skill of knowing who we are and being who we are in all circumstances, and understanding the interconnectedness of all things, not in the woo-woo way, but in the quantum physics way, as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that our legacy becomes the energy that we are creating, right? And then more quantum physics, right? Quantum entanglement. What we put out affects everything around us. So one's legacy, for example, doesn't have to be a monument or a book or even a bunch of children, right? It could be the energy that we have generated in our life, and in our death. Then that shift, perhaps even with this one person that we are, has been able to make some kind of a difference in all the people that we encounter. Right?
That's it. Yeah, that's it. I mean, like, you're remembered by the people around you after your death, right?
Yeah.
So
that's what they say, is you don't really die until no one remembers you anymore. But even still, you've made an impact here.
Yeah.
Every interaction that we have with another human being, or with any living being or non-living being, right? Because it's all the same. Yeah. Beautiful.
It is. And the breath reminds you of this. Again, each inhale, you're inhaling from that which is not you, but keeps you alive. Mm-hmm. You can't hold on to your breath. You can't buy it. You can't grab it. You can't put it in a savings account. You have to let it go. You have to give back.
Right.
To the world. Mm-hmm. And you share the same breath with everybody around you, no matter what language you speak, no matter what your religion is. And you feel this when you breathe with people, you can never feel alone.
So true.
Right? Like you can't. And the people of the Prana started during COVID. Nobody knew each other. I was like, the world is freaking out. I'm not freaking out. I think this breathing stuff works, Let me teach it. Right.
Right
and so I started teaching online, and I was like new to the whole online thing. And we met for like a year and a half. There was this group that formed twice a week. And people told me, like, this is how I got through COVID, like this. And then we met a year and a half later. And I mean, we barely would speak to each other. We literally, like, I would turn on the Zoom thing. We would do the meditations in silence mostly, and then maybe chat a little bit. And then that was it. And then we met each other at a retreat. I organized it, and everybody was like best friends. It's like they knew each other, and it's really amazing. It's beautiful.
It is fantastic. And I love that you started that during COVID, when the breath and oxygen was in question at the very least. And to be able to turn to our breath, our lungs, our prana, the Kundalini breathing was phenomenal for clearing the right passageways to avoid COVID. I did some research on it during the pandemic, and I practice Kundalini as well. It's like, oh, good. So I'm doing the right thing. But the idea that to turn toward the thing that was causing people pain and illness, the breath part, I think also on an energetic level probably helped your people of the prana a lot, because instead of, again, we were like the same thing with grief. I don't like it. It doesn't feel good. I want to avoid it. Oh, COVID's here. People can't breathe. I better do other things, like make sure I don't want to even think about it, but imagine, turning in and working with the breath I think something shifts with that too, not just the practice, but the intention of saying, I'm not afraid to face my breath, which is really beautiful. Yeah, that's fantastic. Okay, I have one final question for you.
Can I just
Oh
add?
yeah, please go.
You brought it to the body, and really, grief and love both live in your heart, right? And so when you're talking about this link to breathing, that when we work with any breath, we're working with the heart chakra, and this space here, which you speak to anybody who's in deep grief, this is where it hurts.
Yeah.
And so, like you said before, there's a tendency to want to contract, right? But when we face, what we're actually going through, and allow ourselves to take a deep breath in and expand and allow, we actually make more space for the healing to come in, because the breath is healing.
Yeah. It's just getting over that initial fear part, right? Or the avoidant part, that I don't want to go into the thing that hurts. Because it's just, maybe it'll never stop, and so.
Yeah. I mean, I always say to people, this is the proof that this is how you show your love today, right? This is your love. It's kind of like in reverse. It's your love, right? And how many people I've worked with, they come to see me almost to have permission to be allowed to feel sad.
Wow.
Like, is this normal? And I'm like, oh yeah. Is it normal after a year? Yeah. Yeah. After 2 years? Yeah. 20 years?
20.
Yeah.
For sure.
Like, and then I say to people, if you weren't sad, I'd be really worried. I'd be really worried. And I would think like you're kind of a psychopath. Right? Because what's the definition of a psychopath? Is somebody that doesn't feel.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. That's such a great point. And everything comes back to love, but we forget that something like grief is also so connected to love. That is a really good reminder for anyone listening who's grieving right now. That's a really helpful thing to hold on to. So how is breath a teacher? You've referred to that in your work, that breath is a teacher. How do you see breath as a teacher?
That's a good question. I think all of this that we're talking about today, it comes down to relationship. And so how do I relate to what is how do I relate to who I think I am, even, right? Because that's fabricated too, right? But how do I relate to the breath? And so when I do a daily practice for the last 20 years, and every day I sit down and I'm in a different place. And yeah, there's days I don't want to sit down and breathe, and there's days that, it comes very easily, but it's always about noticing that relationship. And this is the relationship to my life. This is the relationship to, we were born with an inhale and we die with an exhale. And then life is just a bunch of inhales and exhales in between.
Yeah.
Right. And so how conscious do we want to be of that? Right. What's the level of awareness? Because when you're conscious to your breath, and not your mind, you connect to life. Right. I mean, it's that simple. It's so simple. There's nothing complicated, and it's not intellectual. It's a deeply felt experience, and it's real. It's probably the most real thing that you can ever do in your life. Like I said, there's these, very, very obvious things that somehow people can spend their whole life without noticing their breath unless there's an issue, right?
Right. Right. Or they're, expending energy and, oh, wow, I'm breathing hard. But yeah. And so I can see that the teaching is really just like any good teacher is not doing anything but calling your attention to what is already.
Yeah.
And the depth within that. So something as simple as breathing is really a reminder of our cycle of living and dying, and that we are part of that, and that everything around us is part of that.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
it's so profound.
Teaching.
I mean, you could spend your whole life unpacking that, right? Like, and then
right, I know, yeah.
And this is the beauty. I've been doing this so long, but like, every day I observe something, something new or, another way. So it's not like, you ever get good at this stuff or you ever figure it all out.
Right, which is part of the fun.
Yes, thankfully. But, in when we're talking about therapy, and I do work as a therapist, and the link between the breath and anxiety is this has been clinically studied, that the faster you breathe, the more stressed out you are. And it's very simple to understand because you're not bringing any enough oxygen to your brain, right? So your body is kind of going, hey, life is dangerous right now. Like the world is a dangerous place to be. I'm going to be stressed out because I don't have enough food, right? Like brain food. And so you get anxious. And I mean, most people I see in my practice who have anxiety or stress are not breathing. So, this is why I started teaching, because this is the basis. This is the basis of, if you want to take care of your, quote unquote, mental health, it begins there. It's the simplest and the kind of most practical that everyone can do and doesn't cost anything.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Just do one, find one breath and just practice it every day.
Beautiful. Yeah. Again, it just brings it back to the simplicity and the depth at the same time. Well, I think that's a beautiful way to end. But before we do, if there was something that you wish everybody knew, if you could impart some thought or wish or message to humanity in an instant, what would it be?
We can't do this alone. Yeah, you can't do this alone.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah, we're in this together.
Yeah, whether we like it or not.
yeah, with all the good stuff that comes with that, and all the annoying and everything. It's
Yeah, we're all siblings, folks.
And one more thing, there's always the capacity to make beauty. Every situation, there's the capacity to make beauty. And one thing I didn't link, but I'll just touch on it really quickly, is, the link between art. Like when you breathe, we say that we breathe in oxygen and prana is the life force energy, which is why, even if you have an oxygen tank, you're not necessarily receiving prana, right? The life force energy. And this life force energy that's found in each breath, it's found in a lot of things around us, is that creative energy of life, that energy that makes artworks, that puts things into the world, puts ideas into the world, generates, right? And so, when we breathe, we connect to that energy, that generative life force energy and the vitality. And this is the antidote to stress. This is the antidote to a lot of how do I bring more life into the world? When I am grieving, right? How do I become more alive when I'm grieving? Yeah.
Yes, Ram Dass talked about that, productive grief versus non-productive grief, and I think you're speaking about productive grief. How can I create something with this without consciously trying to do so? It's it's an internal thing.
Yeah.
So how can people reach you, Esther?
How can people reach me? I'm on Instagram, Studio Seed. I have a website. People can sign up to my mailing list, and the peopleoftheprana.com. That's a website that for the breathing techniques and the morning breathing practice that I lead.
Beautiful. I will have those addresses in the show notes so everybody can find you. Thank you so much for being on Self Talk, Esther.
Oh, you're welcome, Rachel. Thank you for inviting me.
Hi, this is Rachel Astarte from the Self Talk podcast. I'd love for you to send me your emails with questions or stories about yourself. What are you looking for? What are your questions? What are you grappling with in your own personal life that has to do with your identity, with yourself, with your very existence? These are the things that we're going to talk about during the podcast. And go ahead. It's all right. Get deep. I can handle it. So send them to Rachel@selftalkpodcast.com. And I'll see you on the next episode.